Hello, everybody, and welcome to Law Bite number 126, dated December the 6th, 2020. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This Law Bite is entitled Barron versus the City of Baltimore, aka Barron versus Baltimore, 32 U.S. 243, 1833. Barron versus Baltimore was a landmark decision from the U.S. Supreme Court addressing the issue of the applicability of the Federal Bill of Rights to the state governments. It is also a very important decision because my hometown, the city of Baltimore, is listed as the respondent in this case. So if you do not know what happened here, stay tuned. You're in the right place. So in Barron versus Baltimore, Mr. John Barron was a profitable wharf owner, at the Inner Harbor, and his revenues exceeded the average revenues, His wharf was, a very, very booming business. That is, until the city of Baltimore initiated a massive public works project at the Inner Harbor, resulting in a great deal of sediment piling up around his wharf, making the water level much too shallow for ships to dock there. Basically, his wharf was rendered useless. So Mr. Barron sued the city of Baltimore for $4,500, claiming that he had been deprived of his property, without just compensation, as required by the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. The trial court ruled in Mr. Barron's favor, but on appeal to the Court of Appeals of Maryland, the decision of the trial court was reversed in its entirety. And the Court of Appeals of Maryland held that the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was not applicable to the state of Maryland or any other state, as the Federal Bill of Rights are only applicable to the federal government. Indeed, Mr. John Barron was certainly not going to take this lying down and appealed this matter to the Supreme Court of the United States. Making the argument that the state of Maryland, indeed all the states, were bound by the Federal Bill of Rights. This was an open question at the time, folks. And the Supreme Court ruled unanimously through Chief Justice John Marshall that the Federal Bill of Rights are not applicable to the state governments. Indeed, Amendments 1 through 10 were designed specifically to be limitations on the authority and power of the United States federal government only. Not the states. Nothing in the history or text of any of the Federal Bill of Rights suggested that they were ever intended to be made applicable to the states, but only to the federal government. And indeed, as those amendments were designed to exclusively restrain the powers of the general government, as Marshall said, which of course is the federal government, the court had no authority to apply the Bill of Rights to the states. Marshall further reinforced his position in holding that the Constitution, via Article 1, Sections 9 and 10, listed specific prohibitions on the states and the federal government, And in the section limiting the powers of the states, it made no mention whatsoever of any of the provisions of the Bill of Rights as limiting the power of the states, The Federal Bill of Rights were designed to be applicable only to restrain the power of the federal government as originally designed. They were not intended to restrain the power of the state governments. Thus, Mr. John Barron lost his case, and the matter was dismissed as the Supreme Court did not have jurisdiction to technically pass judgment upon it, as Marshall made emphatically clear through the opinion. So the holding of the court, quite simply, in Barron versus Baltimore, was that the Federal Bill of Rights were only applicable to restrain the actions of the federal government, not the state governments. And with respect to the Federal Bill of Rights, we are talking specifically about Amendments 1 through 10 to the U.S. Constitution, if anyone was in doubt over what amendments we were talking about. All right, even though it's only Amendments 1 through 8, which contain specific rights per se. All right, so that was that, and that is Barron versus Baltimore. All right, that the Federal Bill of Rights were only applicable to the federal government, not to the state government. Okay, so Maryland, neither Maryland nor Baltimore was technically obligated under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution to compensate Mr. Barron for his lost property. All right, that was that. Okay, he would have had to have made his argument under some other state provision, but the federal Constitution could offer him no relief, as the Federal Bill of Rights were not applicable to the states, and thus the Fifth Amendment's requirement that private property taken for public use had to be given just compensation to the owner. He had to give just compensation to the owner after taking their private property. That was not applicable to the state of Maryland or any other U.S. state. Federal Bill of Rights was only applicable to the federal government only. All right? Not the states. So Barron was out of luck. All right? Fifth Amendment did not apply to the state of Maryland, and thus he wasn't getting any compensation under that provision. Now, Barron versus Baltimore has never been expressly overruled as a decision. However, it has been essentially overruled with the adoption of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution in 1868 and a litany of different U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have, to date, incorporated virtually all of the Bill of Rights to the states via the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. There are very few remaining provisions of the Federal Bill of Rights today which are not applicable to the states. Okay? So like I said, while Barron has never been point blank overruled by any one subsequent decision, okay, the 14th Amendment and, like I said, a litany of other decisions have essentially rendered Barron versus Baltimore to be effectively useless at this point, except with respect to the very few remaining provisions of the Bill of Rights that have not been made applicable to the states via the Supreme Court's selective incorporation process, okay, which we have talked about in another video. All right. So once again, last but certainly not least, the holding of the court in Barron versus Baltimore was that the Federal Bill of Rights were only applicable to restrain the actions of the federal government, not the state governments. At that time, the Bill of Rights were not applicable to the states. They were only applicable to the federal government. All right? So that's Barron versus Baltimore. Any questions or controversies, please feel free to leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay? If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, I invite you to do so now. Just hit that little red subscribe button to your right and we will be in business. Thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope I was able to help you with something with the video. All right? Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.